Hello, welcome back to the Chris Ott channel. I'm Chris Ott, and this is part 9 in the series on causation. Now, I'm going to cover a lot of material today, and we're going to put more into these videos. We're going to start speeding it up because I want to get these done so I can return to finishing my book. But this is helping me to organize my book by just getting a chance to speak out loud about these ideas. Now, last time I discussed a way of out of the age-old type of cause, which was to posit something, okay, as the cause. Either something you find in nature, like magnets or something. Thales did that 2,600 years ago. He found magnets and he felt he'd happened upon what's really the cause of things. Or as time went on, as I've explained in other series, as the habit became to posit something hidden, something you don't see, something totally theoretical. You give it a name. And I gave a list of those before. The problem with these is that they are only they're the name of the cause, but because no mechanism is given for how they cause what they're said to cause, they're just a nominal cause. It's just a cause in name only, because there's no explanation. Okay, so if I say the world is caused by an invisible magical turtle, but I don't explain how the turtle creates the world, well, it's just a nominal cause. It's like the turtle. That's the name of the cause. But it's not a cause in the sense of explanation. So it's not helpful. I use this brick to make my point. Here's an object. It's a phenomenal object. That means it's within the scope of our experience. It's an experiential object. Imagine how that's supposed to be the cause of something. An object by itself it's not even possible for it to cause anything. But then when we have an invisible theoretical object, even less so, because we can't even speculate on how it does this since we can't even observe it or do an experiment. So the alternative that has arisen in modern times to explain the cause of conditions that we find in nature is processes. A process is a series of events that give rise to something which wasn't there before. Either a new state of something that pre-existed, or something entirely new is created by that process. Okay, so things we say supervene upon other things and states through a process. Now, I proposed as an explanation for our universe that first of all we had to isolate what it was we were explaining. I said any real introspection on it will reveal that what we're trying to explain when we say that the universe is our experiential phenomenal universe, the universe that I can touch and feel and smell, and also by universe, the universe of my thoughts. I experience those. My pains, my emotions, my fears. That's what I want to explain. That's what I mean by explaining the world. So that's kind of different than the way they have thought in the past. In the past, they felt that the experiential world is the effect of some theoretical hidden world called the external world. And by external, meaning it's outside of our experience. So they essentially posited a brick, you know. But they couldn't see this brick, so they couldn't really figure out how it was causing our experience. Obviously we can't even find any correlations between this theoretical world and our experience, since it's just, I mean, it doesn't even have any characteristics, right? It's just a word, it's a nominal cause. So I proposed that experience, our experience of the world, is an effect of a process. And what is it a process of? It's a process of an evolving ways of perceiving. So I said that originally there was perception, and I said just to imagine this, just imagine perception everywhere, and then a process of an order of ways of perceiving, which I use lenses to symbolize, gave rise to both the phenomenal object, the things we perceive, and the phenomenal self. Both arise as effect of this process. Realize that when you talk about self, okay, yourself, that's what you mean is part of your phenomenal world, okay? So, this phenomenal world, including the subject and the object, which are both phenomenal, arise out of a process which is not phenomenal. Now, what would stop a person from criticizing this idea by saying, hey, I see a problem. Your lenses, or ways of perceiving, or which I call in all my books, perceptual schema, which just means way of organizing your experience. A schema is a way of organizing something, okay? Those are occult entities, theoretical entities. So you've got theoretical entities. No, I don't. No, I don't. Perception is not a phenomenon, okay? It does not belong to the phenomenal, okay? It is the condition for the experience of phenomena, okay? Conscious perception is a condition for there being phenomena, okay? It's not a phenomenon. You're never gonna go find, a jar of perception. How much perception, how many ounces of perception are in that jar? That's just nonsense. It's a verb, to perceive, from percipiere, which means to gather or to perceive. It used to mean to gather things like wheat and rinse, and it came to mean gather knowledge through our senses and through our thoughts. And then in the modern times, the word perception has been degraded to just mean sense perception, but we don't care. It's not how we're using it. We're using it in its original sense. Now, I want to explain something that I went over quickly last time at the end, which I call the historical fallacy. That name I took from a philosopher, John Dewey, who's famous for his work in American education. It's from the 19th century. And I don't recommend relying on modern explanations of the historical fallacy. They misunderstand it. The thinking has changed a lot. I'm going to explain it right now in a way that's that's the best way that I ever have used to explain it, with an example. The historical fallacy, I'll read it. I'll read what John Dewey said, because his words are excellent. Because his explanation repeats itself, his main explanation of the concept, the mistake that the mind makes. Because he repeats himself, I'm just going to use the second sentence in a paragraph, because it says the same thing as the first sentence. Okay, and you can find this in Wikipedia under historical fallacy, if you want, John Dewey's words. A state of things characterizing an outcome is regarded as a true description of events which led up to this outcome. Okay? So something in the effect is imagined in the supposed imagined theoretical cause, which couldn't happen because it had to come about as a result of the process. When, as a matter of fact, if this outcome had already been in existence, there would have been no necessity for the process. It's kind of like a joke, but people have a very hard time with it. Let me give some other ways of wording it. When thinking about the cause of something, okay, you attribute it to that cause, something that comes about only as a result of that cause. Okay? How can you have something that exists only because of a process existing before a process, before that process? Okay? If something comes about because of a process, then you gotta have the process for it to exist. So, I say that the idea of let's call this the external world. It's a phenomenal part that everything that we see, perceive, think, the object of our experience. And this is our concept of ourselves, which is also part of our object of our thinking and our understanding. And when we look down at our hands, it's actually physically in our midst, in part of the phenomenal world. These and things like them did not create the world. These are the world, and they are the effect of a process which is not like the world. The process is psychological, and even its effect is psychological. What we call the universe is the psychological experience of all the things that we do. Okay. Now, I said several times, I said that the reason that attempts to do away with the theoretical external world as cause of our experiential phenomenal world was because, the reason that it persisted for 2,000 years, more, is because all those experiments to do away with it, they fell into solipsism. Okay, solipsism is the idea that everything's in your head, okay? So, 10 people come in a room and they watch a guy play the piano. They all heard the same music, they all saw the same piano, they all talked to the same guy. So, there must be something outside of their head, outside of their experience, that's causing their experience, which is the same one. See, it's the need to have a single cause that's the same for everyone, okay? But why couldn't, and it couldn't be, if it's your experience, if the piano player is in your head, if your experience of the piano player is the actual piano player, that means the piano player is in your head. And how did the same piano player get in everybody's head? Okay, I'm going to explain. That's what solipsism is, and that was the problem, and that's why nobody has dared to even try to come up with a theory other than positing this problem-producing crazy theory, the external world, which is the basis for, actually, for the movie The Matrix, but we won't get into that. Now, where was I? Okay. The problem with this, and the reason they were falling into this, is because they were imagining, again, it's the historical fallacy, the concept of inness, something in something, like I talked about the sugar in the glass of water, or the water in the glass, and the glass in the room. Okay, this inness is something borrowed from the phenomenal. In the phenomenal world, things are in things. I happen to be like in this shirt, and okay, and but to take that feature of the phenomenal and read it into its cause okay? Something being in something is historical fallacy. You're taking something from the effect of a process and you're projecting it into the process. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little idea how dumb this is. Okay. The idea that your experience is in your brain. It's in your brain. We all are taught this. See, in more ancient times, they would have said your experience and your emotions and your thoughts are in your mind, okay? And in the Greek time, they would say it was in your chest, okay? And literally, okay? And your soul was in your chest, okay? And Plato had, there were three. There was one in here, and one in here, and there's one in your abdomen. And the one that was here was the one that left your body when you died and went to the next world to reincarnate, by the way. Anyway, I want to show how strange this is, this idea that our experience, our perception, our thoughts, our entire phenomenal world is in our brain, okay? First of all, a brain looks kind of confusing, okay? It kind of looks like a little machine, but it's really not. I'm going to give a better analogy for a brain, and that is this can of Spam. See, when looking for a brain is made mostly of fat, and where it's about 60% fat, and it's got some electricity in there, and it's got some electrolytes and chemicals. Now, it happens to be about this size, okay? I'm going to put that there. And this is really quite disgusting. I hope you can see that it's a fatty thing, okay? Let's put this aside, it's falling down. The notion that your experiential world is in a fatty, blobby thing is about as crazy as the notion that your thoughts are in this piece of Spam, all right? Like, no one's ever found anything like that in there. No, it's true that we can detect electrical activity, and it's true that there are chemicals in your brain and that things move around in your brain. And some of this correlates with certain experiences, okay? However, I'm going to talk about that more later. For now, just see the concept of the inness. It's kind of primitive, okay? Because the old notion of things as causes just lends itself to primitive thinking. And anyway, at the core, the problem is the historical fallacy, okay? Imagining in your cause, when coming up with your cause, something that you borrowed from the effect, all right? Now, if the historical fallacy still seems a little obtuse, I have a story that I like to tell. It's actually from an experience I had with my daughter when she was about 3 years old, or 4. We had a wonderful friendship, my daughter Megan and I, when she was little, and we still do. And we talk about this, and we talk about the historical fallacy now in a lot of depth, actually. She's taken psychology, and she's very good at wording these things. But one day, it was in Arkansas, where I lived for 16 years, and mostly raised Megan. One day, we were riding in the car, and she saw out the window what I called a steam shovel, okay? So I think today they might call it a backhoe or something. But for some reason, that's how I was taught the term as a kid. We saw a mechanical shovel at a construction site. And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that's a steam shovel." And she said, "Well, how do they make steam shovels?" And I said, "Well, they make them out of metal." And she said, well, how do they get the metal? And I said, well, they dig it out of the ground as ore before they put it through a process to make it into iron and steel. And then she says, well, how do they get it out of the ground? And I said, well, they use a backhoe. I mean, they use a steam shovel. And she was really pleased that I had said that, because it was so, she saw it, we both saw right away how absurd my story was. So I said, well, let me retell the story, because that doesn't work. Because today, they would use a steam shovel to dig up the metal to make a steam shovel. But that's not really the story of where steam shovels come from. The story would be more like this. Long time ago, there were some people, and they would take a stick. They would dig with their stick in the ground, and they dug up some metal ore, and they smelted it down, and they were able to make a little shovel. And this allowed them to dig even deeper and dig up more ore, and then out of that they were able to make something, you know, a little bigger, and then that allowed them to dig a little more, and then finally they were able to dig up so much ore and all kinds of other kinds of ore, and learn how to you know, bind them together to make alloys, and then eventually they were able to create a steam shovel. So in the second story, you have a process. You start from something simple. The process repeats and repeats and repeats, and it becomes more complex. You finally get something more complex out of something simple. Okay? That's an example of the historical fallacy, which is my first telling her that they had to have a steam shovel in order to make a steam shovel. Okay? And that's where steam shovels come from. Okay? Continue. Now, as I said, this new way of explaining our experiential world, first by identifying that our experiential world is the world we're trying to explain, and then by offering a process, which is by nature, I mean, by necessity, of course, it's a psychological process, because that's what we're trying to explain, our psychological experience of the material and mental world. Now, the reason that we didn't fall into solipsism, the idea that everything is in your head, is because we used a process, and because we didn't commit the historical fallacy. Now, I want you to notice that in our account of the universe, your head is in the world, okay? It's part of the phenomenal world. My head is in the world with the things that I perceive. The world that I perceive is not, as they have it, in my head. Let me say that again. My head and my brain, in my account, arise in the phenomenal world as it arises. It arises because it's part of the phenomenal world. It arises in tandem with the rest of the phenomenal world. It arises in perception, in the world of experience. Okay? The world of experience doesn't arise in my brain or in my head. No, I'll say that again. The reason that we don't have solipsism from this process is that we are in sync with common sense that my head is in the world is not in my head. My experiential world is not in my head. Okay? As materialists would believe, or as everyone has always believed, somewhere in your body is your experience. And I say, no. Your body It's in your experience. Your experience is not in your body. Because your body and yourself are an outcome of the very process that's creating the phenomenal. Okay. That's good. Now, we have to talk about, without my getting into all the details that work out with this system, that resolve the problems that have troubled philosophers for centuries and even millennia. I want to talk about something I've promised to talk about, which is why this is important. Okay? Why it's important to have an explanation for our world, okay, and ourselves in it. Where do we come from, okay? This is very close to the question, what is the meaning of life, okay? Why am I here? Where did I come from? What's the purpose of my being here? Is there a purpose, okay? These are the deep questions. When we imagine or see a cartoon of, say, somebody getting to the top of a mountain and there's a yogi up there, what does he ask him? He says, what's the meaning of life? Every joke about that seeker finding the guy at the top of the Himalayas is some play on the question, what's the meaning of life? Okay. I do a newsletter for a spiritual group in Myrtle Beach, and every week I put in a cartoon. I just snag them from the internet for the conclusion of the newsletter. And I see these all the time. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cartoons of the struggling aspirant getting to the top of the mountain and asking some question, which inevitably is some, as I said, is some spin on what's the meaning of life? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? Okay. Now, people always ask, that's kind of like what people think, philosophy must be about. Well, if it ever was, it's not now. But I am going to say why it's important. Now, when I was telling this account of these lenses arising, okay, in perception, so first there's perception, and then there's ways of perceiving, and each arises in a sort of necessary order to give rise to the experiential world phenomenally, psychologically, in all people, and then a process at the end of which we actually even find ourselves in that phenomenal world that was created this way. It would be reasonable to ask, well, why did that happen? I mean, that seems like maybe that works, but what would make it happen? I mean, why did that happen? What started it? What pushed it along? Or what pulled it along? See, that kind of thing. That's asking, but why did that happen? So it's like, that's why we're here, but then why did that happen? So I think you get why I was talking about those causal chains at the beginning of the series. So when we really want to know what's the cause, we want to know what's really responsible. We don't want to just have something in that chain of effects of that original cause, okay? What's truly the original, fundamental, first reason that this happened? That would be the most profound sense of what's the cause of something. We get by with much less profound senses of cause. We just say, well, what's the cause of the car crash? And we say, well, his brakes went out. Okay, good. Well, To answer that question, I have to say where I got my answer, because I didn't think it up, right? I got this answer from the teaching of Meher Baba, the Master Meher Baba. And I'll talk a lot more about Meher Baba later, okay? Right now, it's not important to follow Meher Baba or to like Meher Baba or to know a lot about Meher Baba. The only point is that's where I got this answer. Now in logic, in formal logic, there's a fallacy. And the fallacy is called ad hominem circumstantial. That's when you don't believe someone because of something circumstantial that's about them. So let's say, Johnny gave an explanation, has a theory for, germ theory. But Johnny's, steals hubcaps on the weekend. So we can't, consider his germ theory. Well, that's ad hominem circumstantial. There's no relationship between the hubcap stealing problem and his thoughts on germ theory. We have to look at the thoughts on germ theory if we're going to consider the thoughts on germ theory. The point about hubcaps is a red herring, okay? It's a non sequitur. It's like you're changing the subject, or you don't know what the subject is. So it's irrelevant what a viewer thinks of Meher Baba, people like Meher Baba, Persians, because ethnically he was Persian, or Indians, because nationally he was an Indian, or something like that. It's irrelevant because that's not what we're talking about. It's like we're talking about something that he said and seeing if it worked. Now he could have said this accidentally, maybe he heard it from somebody else, maybe he heard it from his own master, he had one when he was young. It doesn't matter. Let's say it would be like there could be a madman in a hospital for the criminally insane, and he has the answer. Well, we need the answer. The key is the cure for cancer. What does it matter? Anything else? Let's just look at the cure for cancer, see if it cures cancer. Now also, there's another reason for considering what Meher Baba said. And I'm going to get to what he said. And that is what I went over in an earlier talk, which is that everything we ever could know is from our experience, or our experience of someone's testimony of their experience. Okay? So everything I know about England is based on testimony of others. Okay? And it's from, documentaries and books and maps. But all of that is based on, ultimately, the experience of somebody who, put those maps and documentaries and books together. So I'm still relying upon experience. I'm relying upon my experience, of their experience, of their memory, of a prior experience. And so it's all traceable to experience. Now, mystics, like Jesus, okay, they tell us things that Christians, let's take Jesus, they take on faith. But what is the basis for their faith? Or the basis of their faith is the testimony of Jesus. They believe him. Okay, so he talks about that he comes from the Father, and then when he leaves, he returns to the Father. Okay, and that the kingdom is in you, and things like this. And we don't know what he means. Okay, but we trust him, and we try to find the meaning of those words because we take him as testifying to something that is actually something he has experienced or does experience. Okay? So it's the same principle. Now, nothing I said just now could be objected to by an atheist. I'm not saying Jesus is true, he's telling the truth. I'm just saying we're using the same process of gaining knowledge that we use for everything, including the atheist. If the atheist has some idea about some atomic theory, well, it's based on the testimony of the scientists and that performed the experiments. It's not his own experience, it's his experience of the testimony of someone, and then he trusts their experience. We all have to trust somebody's testimony. And when people just conflict, we have other reasons to choose who to believe. Now, I'm only interested in what Meher Baba had to say here. I'm not interested in making any kind of case for Meher Baba. He can make his own case for who he thinks he is and how he knows what he does, and etc. That's totally beyond my pay grade. Okay? He could be completely a false prophet. That wouldn't make any difference in what I'm about to say. But if we examine what he has said is the case, which he claims is from his own experience, and we apply it to the problems of philosophy that have boggled the greatest minds since the beginning of thought, and that's not an exaggeration, if applying what he has said and testing them logically, if they can actually account for these things in a better way without the problems that previous theories have had, well, we have to really consider that. Okay? It's kind of like a pragmatic epistemology. It works, so we'll use it. If the person gives us a cure for cancer, we try it and people are getting better, we'll use it. What anybody has to say about the guy who had said it isn't red herring. It's another subject that's unrelated. It's not what we're interested in here. Right here, I'm looking at this from the perspective of a philosopher who deals with philosophical issues, not as a hagiographer who studies, saintly people and decides, their status and ranks them. That's not what I am. I don't have any education in that. That's not what I'm even interested in. Hagiography. I so much don't know anything about hagiography, I have to look up and make sure it's a word. Hagiography. Yeah. Biography that idealizes the subject. A hagiography is the biography of a saint or an ecclesiastical leader, and by extension, an adulatory and idealized biography of a founder, saint, monk, nun, or icon, because it is the right word. Hagiography, not hagiography. All right. Now, Meher Baba wrote a book called God Speaks, the Theme and Purpose of Creation. Now, this whole series of talks has promised to talk about the cause of things. okay? Or more specifically, the cause of our phenomenal experiential world, the world of our experience. Where did it come from? I find myself in it. So I'm asking also about myself. How did I get here? And why am I here? Okay? But now, initially I just said we're talking about the cause. What caused it? What's responsible? What made it happen? To understand where I'm going to have to turn to something. Anybody can look this up. In Wikipedia has an article, it's okay. It's, the article is called Four Causes. And these are the four senses of cause by Aristotle, okay, ancient Greek philosopher. Now I'm going to go over them because normally people find these to be quaint or archaic, or at least some of them. And recently, when I was working on my book, I realized that they're not. They're intuitive. There's even one more that he misses that is intuitive, but that's another discussion we'll get into. But I want to go over these four causes, and then I want to focus on one of them. All of them are important to us. Now, what I mean is, his four causes, they're four criteria, four things you'd have to account for to really have explained the cause of something. And by something, I mean either a change that you observe or how something got there that wasn't there before, okay? Which is in itself a change. So it's an account for a change. It requires four things to be explained, okay? The first is called the material cause. So I come upon a brick house and I want to know its cause. Well, part of that cause is that it's made of bricks, okay? Or if I see a marble table and I want to know, well, what's the cause of this table? Part of the cause is marble. Or out in the forest, things are made out of wood, trees aren't. That's part of their cause. It's what they're made of. The second is the formal cause. Now, the word form is what he's alluding to. And the word form, of course he's speaking in Greek, but you get the idea. The word form in English actually means the shape. And he did have in mind Plato's idea of forms, like the form of the cup, the shape, the form of the horse. Okay, so if I come upon a table, part of my explanation of that table is its shape. It has four legs, it's so tall. It's basically, you're explaining it fully, okay? And the next one is the agent, okay? In modern world, this is one of the main senses of cause that we mean. Well, we mean, what is the, or it was called the efficient cause, but it means the agency. What made it be that way? So if I come upon some trees in the beach and they're all swept to the right, because there are places like that, what caused that? What's the agency? Well, it's the wind. The wind blows in a certain direction, and the trees gradually all move in that direction. That's something I saw when I was young. But, or if we're talking about the brick house, we'll say the carpenter who built it out of bricks. That's the efficient cause. Now, this fourth cause is the one that has been dropped. But we're going to see, and it's called the final cause. Now, final cause, it's misleading how that sounds. What it means is its purpose, its end. For what sake was it created? Now, there's a big presumption in a question like, what was the purpose of this coming into existence? In nature, that's presumptuous because it implies some intention, which implies God. But Aristotle this is before Christianity, and he wasn't either Jewish nor Christian. He was a pagan, and he was an atheistic pagan at that, if not at best agnostic. So he doesn't mean God when he says there's a purpose for everything. By the way, this topic is called teleology, so teleological concern, the purpose. Now, going back to Meher Baba, I said that his main book, is called, its subtitle is The Theme and Purpose of Creation. How did this happen? This creation that we see, that we perceive. And this word creation is clever too because it has a double meaning. It means both the world is sometimes called creation. Okay, look at these beautiful works of art in creation. Look at the birds. That's creation, but it also implies it's created. Okay, now my interpretation of Meher Baba is these lenses, and I'll show why later. Without the explanation that I've given, Meher Baba will not make any sense. It certainly won't impress a philosopher. This is sort of like a layer that has to be sort of like laid over what he says, but it's throughout what he says, and I would say this is sort of like the secret of the universe that people weren't smart enough to have revealed to them prior to now, because we didn't even have psychology, even at the time of Muhammad. Okay, so many things, evolution didn't exist, processes we didn't understand. Okay. Consciousness wasn't even a word until recently. Now, Meher Baba says very plainly what the purpose of the process that created the universe is. And I want to show how it's possible and how it would account for so many things that are not accounted for in our current thinking. But I want to interject something here before I explain what he says is the purpose, the driving force behind the process that produced our experiential universe and what we're doing here and where we're going. Notice that if you asked a biologist in a university who was explaining Darwinian evolution and the Big Bang to you, and you said, yeah, but what was the purpose? They would probably give you a bad grade just for asking the question, unless you got it, that we're smarter now, we know that there isn't any. Okay? It's all random accidents. It's all accidents. It's all coincidence. It's coinkydink. It's just chaos. And then things got created out of it. Now, there's more to it. I'll give credit to what they say to account for the fact that there isn't a purpose. I'll discuss that. But for now, that's the main thing. There is no teleological question in science. There's no reason, there's no purpose. There is no meaning to life in our modern scientific materialistic view. Those ideas like meaning and purpose, they belong to religion. They don't belong to our materialistic scientific paradigm, which we now believe is truth with capital T, or at least in scientism, which is sort of like a prevailing attitude that science is the only real path to truth. The only answer to something is scientific. Well, I would even argue that that's true, but I would expand the meaning of scientific. I would make it mean rational, and have it account for things. Now, because in our modern world there is no purpose, you have a degrading of culture. It's kind of invisible. It happens slowly. But in the 20th century, it was very prevalent in philosophy, and a whole branch of philosophy is dedicated to dealing with the problem of how do you live in a world without meaning or purpose. And it's existentialism. That's the project of existentialism, essentially. How to live in a world post-God. Okay, so there's no meaning. Now, existentialism proposes many ways of handling living in a world without meaning or purpose. One of them, Sartre talks about how man must, create his meaning in every action, which creates a tremendous sense of dread because of the responsibility entailed by that in this sense. Now he's kind of just talking. Sartre actually, in an interview, said, I never really experienced this dread I talk about. It's more like he's being poetic. Like we should feel dread, but he didn't. Because intuitively, we all know that there is a cause and there is purpose, which I'll get to. That's why Aristotle had it in his list. Where did he discover it? His own intuitions. I'm going to talk a lot about that later too, our intuitions, what they are. Now, if you follow existentialism to its conclusion, it leads to absurdism. And I want to read what absurdism is, because it's exactly my point. In philosophy, the absurd refers to the conflict between the human tendency to seek inherent value and meaning in life and the human inability to find any in a purposeless, meaningless, or chaotic and irrational universe. Okay. That's the universe we live in today. It's chaotic and irrational. Now, what do we mean by irrational? Scientists go, oh, yeah, I'm very rational. No, but the universe is totally irrational. Let me explain what I mean. When Aristotle said there was purpose to everything, he didn't mean that there was an intention by a creator, because he didn't believe in such a thing. He preceded that kind of thinking, okay? But what he did believe, from observation, he felt it was from observation, was that the universe was rational. That things were not ordered chaotically, but they were ordered very rationally. And by rational, everything has a reason. If a person comes like a student and he starts talking and he's going from thought to thought, kind of like racing thoughts and a bunch of non sequiturs, like, he's talking about Marilyn Monroe, and now he's talking about, the space launch and, aliens. Actually, we would call that irrational. And the reason is because he has no reason to have move to the next thought. Where's the purpose of it? See, that's what we mean by irrational. A rationale is a reason to hold a belief, okay? The very word reason contains part of what we mean by reason, which is that you have a reason to hold your belief. I believe the moon is made of cheese. Well, you know, there's a lot of evidence that you know, the moon's not made of cheese. I don't need a reason to believe the world's made out of cheese. I have a right to believe, you know, that's, well, crazy is another word for irrational. So, now, in our actions also, you know, Aristotle's kind of a misogynist, so he thought women were less rational. And, you know, you could get that idea from some actions where you don't really know where it's coming from. So you go, I don't see the reason for doing that. So you know, you're not rational. So a really reasoned, rational person, you know, a rationalist, he has a reason for everything he does. Well, so when Aristotle looked around, he saw that, you know, there was like trees and plants, and then he saw that the animals, you know, ate the trees and the plants. And then he saw that, you know, then they pooped, and then there seemed to be a purpose to the poop because the poop helped grow the plants, you know? And everywhere he looked, he would find some reason for that, you know? You find water moving down a river, and you find out that it's, you know, moving certain particles and that create sediment, and you find out that there's evaporation, and then the evaporation its purpose seems to be to create the clouds, which have a purpose of, you know, causing rain, and everything seems to have an order. Now, there was an experiment done at Yellowstone in the late 20th century where they brought back wolves, which they had eliminated from Yosemite, and all kinds of problems in the ecosystem improved when they brought the wolves back. And you can look this up and you'll see the whole chain of events when they restored it to something closer to its natural state, something that was which appeared necessary and have some purpose, the wolves. Everything then fell into kind of like a better working ecosystem. So the wolves actually had a purpose in the ecosystem. Removing them without understanding that created like too many deer, which ended up eating up all the plants, which then made other animals, you know, suffer and decrease in number. I mean, they brought back the wolves, and they got beavers back, you know, dams full of fish and ducks, and you see, this is kind of funny. So you can look that up. But that's what the world that Aristotle saw. And he saw our body, and he saw that all these, you know, eyes had their purpose was to perceive, you know, visual things, and our ears had a purpose of hearing things. And, you know, our sex organs had a purpose for, you know, regeneration. So, he believed that everything has a purpose in an order, in a rational universe. If there were no purpose in his thinking, the world would be irrational. I hope I made that clear. So when I just read what I did, I think it makes more sense. You know, the absurd refers to the conflict between we're talking about absurdism, you know, Camus, okay? The absurd refers to the conflict between the human tendency to seek inherent meaning, a value in life, and the human inability to find any in a now understood to be purposeless, meaningless, chaotic, and irrational universe. All right? But the intuitions of everybody say that there is a purpose. Why do you think that people don't just embrace this sort of reductive materialism? You know, this irrational universe. Why don't they just leave their religion and just go do that? You know, why are they holding on to the past? You know, what do they need? Purpose, meaning. Oh, that's so quaint. That's a barbaric lower man. Is it? Or is it the man who has become an absurdist, a person who has deliberately tried to destroy his own latent natural intuitions and is making himself sick? Now, where does absurdism lead? Nihilism. In an absurd world, you believe in nothing. Nihilism is when you believe in nothing. You could kill your own mother because you don't even believe in motherhood. Nothing is transcendental. Nothing means anything more than anything else. Psychopaths and sociopaths are nihilists. Even that's being polite. I mean, to give them a philosophical expression is kind of overly flattering. But it's essentially nihilism, the belief in nothing. Now you have people who don't know their purpose. They don't know why they're on the earth, and they're trying to change, their gender. Well, there's studies that once they change their gender, they're not any more happy. As a matter of fact, suicide rate goes up. The things that people do to find meaning, and then in the absence of any meaning, the things that they'll do. Drugs, promiscuity, like life-destroying promiscuity. Obesity, television, pornography. So when I'm talking about a cause, seeking a cause for the universe, it's not an academic exercise. It's not because I just have fun thinking about stuff. Wouldn't it be funny if there's a cause? No. Unless the world regains a meaningful cause for their existence, hopefully true, we're doomed. We're doomed. And we can't go back to the past because the past no longer makes sense. We know too much. Okay. So Meher Baba's proposing a underlying driving purpose to the universe is no thing to be smirked about. It's not just like a random extra perk to have a purpose. People have no idea what they're doing here. And that's why they turn to money, to sex, to drugs, to conspiracy theories. What's a conspiracy theory? It's an attempt to find an explanation, a reason, a purpose, an intention. So some people got together in a room and they thought up, we're going to do this, and they're the conspirators. Well, that supplies a sense of purpose, a sense of intelligent reason for things happening. At least some of them. Aliens. They seeded us on the earth. Yes, and they're watching our progress. Makes total sense. It solves all the problems. That's what the gods were. So idiotic. Because how did they get the aliens? That's a great example of historical fallacy, by the way. Reading the thing that you're trying to explain into your explanation. People. The only difference is these are gray, have big eyes and no ears. That explains it. That's how desperate people are. Okay. Now, let's talk about Meher Baba's purpose. If you followed what I said so far, the universe is a psychological experience that we're all having. It is experiential. It's phenomenal. Okay? There's no second universe that's something else. The universe is the experiential universe. It's a psychological effect of a psychological process in an underlying psyche, which I'll talk more about. But we're not ready to do that. And therefore, the purpose must be psychological. Now, Meher Baba, like me, well, that's where I got the idea. It was suggested to my mind by reading him when I was young. He says exactly what I do, which is that universe is the effect, okay? And the first event that's psychological, okay, is the cause. He doesn't have a chain of causes. It's a chain of effects. That one original responsible event is the cause. Because, as I said in the second talk, anything else would not really be the cause. That would be an effect of the cause. There'd just be another effect in a long series of effects of the cause. We want the original, actually responsible event. So, a little different. Let's pretend for a moment that he says that then originally there was perception everywhere, although he puts this differently, and I'll explain the difference, and I'll come back to it. But for now, I don't want to confuse the listener. Keep it simple for the moment. In this state where you could call, if you wanted, you could call it, no, you couldn't. Some people like to say there was consciousness. No, that's not what Meher Baba says, and that's irrational. Consciousness is something that also arises from the process. Okay? Meher Baba has the longest chapter in his book. It's called The Evolution of Consciousness. How consciousness arose. Consciousness is the sense of your existence and your awareness of your being aware. Okay? Full consciousness. That sense of you go, I exist. That Cartesian I am. Okay? That's consciousness. Baba doesn't start with consciousness. As a matter of fact, it's one of the, well, it's really one of the ends of the process. It's consciousness. What the process is producing. Remember, I said all these lenses not only produce the phenomenal world, they produce the you-ness in it. Okay, that you could call that sense of you-ness your consciousness. So we don't start with that. That's part of the effect. We don't read the effect into the cause. So the first event he called a whim. There was a whim. So prior to the whim, there's just sort of like this, let's just call it psyche. That's a Greek word, like a psyche. But not thinking anything and nothing there, just psyche. Just say the psyche. Psyche is another word for soul. But let's not become religious here. To give it a word for the moment. And then a psychological event happened. And it was a whim. And the whim was to know. All right. I'll only give the logic of this. It may not be the place to do it, but I'm going to do it, and maybe I'll do it again later. For there to be perception, there are necessary conditions for the act of perceiving, okay? Or even the power to perceive. And there's essentially one necessary condition, and that is intelligence, okay? I don't mean an intelligent being, I mean intelligence. So Meher Baba wouldn't say that things began with perceiving. They would say they began with intelligence. But intelligence has the capacity to perceive. If there's anything to perceive, intelligence will be able to perceive it. But intelligence is a necessary condition of perception. So we're going to go one step back. Now, part of the nature, let's say that originally there was just infinite intelligence, not an intelligent being. That's the historical fallacy. But intelligence itself. It sounds strange. It's linguistically odd. But just get over it. There's nothing logically possible about it. Then part of the nature of intelligence is the desire to know. Can you imagine coming across a person who had no interest in knowing anything? You try to tell him, I mean, would you call that person intelligent? No, that's not intelligent. Intelligence, by its very nature, if it desires anything, it's to know. Stupid people don't want to know. The intelligent want to know. But what was there for this infinite intelligence, which was all that existed and pervaded, all pervading? So there was no space, so I can't say pervaded space, just all that existed. What was there for it to know? Okay? Remember, there's nothing else but the intelligence. And its nature, its ability, its desire, its capacity to perceive, its capacity to be conscious. Nothing. There isn't anything else. Therefore, if his knowledge was knowledge, it would have to be true. And therefore, the only thing that there is to know for the infinite intelligence is that there is only the infinite intelligence, and that it is the infinite intelligence. And therefore, Meher Baba says that impulse, that first original whim, is the original first cause, or the cause, and he says the cause, because it's not a first cause, it's not a chain of causes, it's a chain of effects of this one cause. That impulse, or urge, or whim, was the sudden impulse, who am I? Now, we don't want to commit the historical fallacy. There was no language, and there were no concepts, and so there was nothing to develop the concept of a who and a why and a question mark, an I and a question mark, and as I said, there's no I yet, there's just the intelligence. So Meher Baba is kind of like skipping a few steps when he says how you could now, looking back on it, articulate the question. However, he means it literally. The desire for self-knowledge is what's motivating evolution. And here we mean evolution. Materialist scientists are eager to say that the motive of everything in evolution is the desire to survive. But that's not exactly what they mean, because of course trees don't have desires, okay? But they still have that survival is sort of like the ultimate good that everything's after. But isn't it possible that things are actually trying to survive and have progeny so they can take birth as their own prodigy of their prodigy later to continue to seek self-knowledge? In other words, there is a desire, there is a motivation to survive, okay? But it's in service of a more profound motivation, the motivation to know, who am I? Okay? Now, if just survival was the real pushing force of biological evolution, then we would have a very different story. Things would not have grown smarter and sharper senses. They would have just gotten sharper teeth and had it laid more eggs until some virus took over the entire universe and everything else was dead and replaced. Nothing would have ever evolved. Because if you look at nature, and you look at the order and the fossil record, everything can experience the world more. Now, materialism cannot account for that, because that's not to survive. That seems to be trying to achieve another end, the desire to know. And before you can know that you exist, you need to first know your environment. And as you're knowing it, this desire to know is actually what is producing that environment, as I described last week, through this evolution of lenses. That is what is pushing the process of the lenses that are needed to produce that world, not to create a world that you can perceive, but to find yourself in it and then realize that you are the very creator of the whole thing. Not you individually, that's not what I mean, but in a sense, each one is that. Every self is sort of like selves in the one self. I'll talk more about that later. We're all one. So that phrase, we're all one, has become so common now, it's becoming a cliche, but no one knows what they mean. But as you listen to this, you'll begin to understand what it means. There's only that one infinite intelligence, and that is what we all really ultimately are. And this universe came into existence, or phenomenal existence, experiential existence, in order for us to learn that. To experience that. You can learn that just by reading Meher Baba's book, let's say, or my books. But to experience that, which Meher Baba gives his testimony, is that this is what he has experienced, and that all mystics are referring to. But in the language of their time, and now we live in a very, very sophisticated time, we're almost overlapping the limit of sophistication. So things have gotten very hard, but we're right at the point where we can actually understand these things. Now, how could this infinite intelligence, why would it start with time when there wasn't anything temporal to be perceiving in terms of time? And, how could it be this order, okay? What I'm going to show, either next time or in a future talk, is that this order is a necessary order. It is not an ad hoc, random order. Each condition requires the previous condition, and so it's a necessary. Each precondition, each lens that comes before other lenses, is a necessary precondition for the next lenses. I'm going to talk about that in detail next time. About that. I can talk a little about it now. You can't have the natural laws before you have space and time. See, when Galileo dropped those balls from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, if he did, you had to have space, which is the distance from the top of the tower to the bottom, and you had to have the time, which is that which is being measured, which was the same for both balls, even though they were different weights. And therefore, without the dimensions of space and time, you're not talking about anything. So before the laws of nature, there had to be space, and before space, there had to be time, and time had to come first because there's no such thing as, and then, anyway, I won't go into that, I'll do that another time. And when you look at the whole thing, the outcome is the universe. All of these, in order to perceive the universe, you have to be able to experience things spatially and temporally and in terms of laws. And so it's the necessary steps to create the end. Now, if time is an illusion, because it's just the first way of perceiving things, and then things are perceived in additional ways apparently afterward, okay, then all of this happened all at once. It didn't happen over time, because time is phenomenal. See, the lens is adverbial. We perceive temporally, and then time is phenomenal. Okay. So therefore, to see the trajectory, you know, the course that must be taken to arrive at the answer to the understood question, who am I as a human being, and then the final answer, experience, oh, I am the infinite intelligence. If there's only one way to get there, from there to here, infinite intelligence will know what it is. It will take the right course. Because it's not infinite stupidity. It's infinite intelligence. It doesn't require experimentation. The answer also is already latent in the question. But the universe had to be created in order for us to have that answer experientially, because we first had to experience all the wrong answers till we arrived at the right answer. So we had to go, I am an ant, I am a giraffe, I am a man, I am a woman. No, I am the infinite intelligence. So all this is in Meher Baba's book. And as I said, you don't have to follow Meher Baba, like Meher Baba, just consider what he said. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of a first cause, which Meher Baba just calls it the cause. Aristotle didn't believe that there could be a first cause, because then there would be an irrational universe. Because everything has to have some explanation, has to have some purpose. So, but a first event would, by necessity, not have anything that caused it. And that would be irrational. So therefore, he believed the universe had always existed as it does. It's very strange, but that's how he thought it through. The universe is rational, and that would be irrational. Later, Christians decided that God pre-existed everything, and then God created the world. And that was the first cause, was God's making the world. However, there's no answer to why God created the world. And there's still a sort of a lack of a real answer to the question, why? Okay, Christians just saying, well, you know, we can't understand, the actions of God, and that's kind of a little out of our league. Well, people are okay. They assume there is some reason. But anyway, back to this thing of Meher Baba's idea that the first event was a whim. St. Augustine, who developed the philosophy of Christianity, he considered the possibility that the world was created by a whim of God. And then he said, oh no, that wouldn't make any sense, because that would make God imperfect. It's very strange. Why would a whim make him imperfect? that doesn't sound intuitive. It kind of goes with Aristotelian thinking. A whim doesn't have a reason, therefore it's irrational. Okay, so that sounds kind of imperfect. However, Mirababa points something out that's highly intuitive, and that is whimsicality is the mark of the free nature. Okay, let's say that the original event, this whim, caused a string of effects that happened over millions of years, and now here we are. Okay? That means that if those were a string of effects of that first cause, every single thing was conditioned by the first cause. And therefore, no free act actually ever happened after the first act. Because everything was just the logical effect of the thing before it in the long, long string of effects of the first cause. So therefore, a free agent is the only agent, something that can act on a whim. The only free thing that ever actually happened was the original whim. Everything else was a necessary consequence. And everything along the way were the necessary conditions of that ultimate consequence. So far from saying saying that this would make God imperfect if he had a whim, Mirababa points out, no, it's the one thing that would make God free. He has nothing forcing him to do or not do. It's the only thing, the only thing that has that is unconditioned, that has nothing forcing it to happen, would be this original whim. So actually Mirababa does make sense, and it's highly intuitive. Next time I'm going to talk about intuitions, or I hope I do. Sometimes I promise to talk about something and I don't get to it for a while. But I think that's enough for today. I hope people have followed what I've said. I'm doing the best I can. This will all be in a book before I die, or at least I'll be a new script. I'm done for now. Have a great day. Have a great week, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.